Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
UN Rights Envoy to probe violence against the Rohingyas in Myanmar. Kashmiri women struggle to make their voices heard after decades of conflict. And U.S. presidential candidate Romney hits the campaign trail in Israel. Mosaic, world news from the Middle East, begins now.
وصل إلى ميانمار المقرر الخاص الأممي المعني بأوضاع حقوق الإنسان في ميانمار.
A United Nations human rights envoy arrived in Myanmar in the first such visit to evaluate the situation in the country amid allegations of ethnic violence and a crackdown by the government and the Buddhist majority against the Muslim Rohingya minority. Meanwhile, the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Ekmeladin Isenoglu, sent the President of Myanmar and the UN Secretary General letters calling for an end to the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya minority in the country.
في ميانمار المسلمون غاضبون وأعداد القتلى والمهجرين والجائعين.
In Myanmar, the Muslims are angry. The number of people killed, displaced, and hungry in Arakan province is rising. They say the crackdown against them was heightened during Ramadan. The presence of this man is the first practical action in Myanmar. His name is Thomas Ohea, and he is the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights. The host country was keen to welcome him with flowers that he held in front of the cameras. But he is here to investigate the claim that bloodshed has been ongoing for months.
سيلتقي المبعوث الأممي مجموعة من السياسيين والحقوقيين والعاملين في مجال حقوق الإنسان.
The UN envoy will meet with a number of politicians and human rights activists and workers. He will also devote part of his time to meet with the leader of the opposition. In the sad province of Arakan, the Rohingya Muslims are stranded. And even during Ramadan, religious scholars and Islamic law students are targets, as dozens have been detained. Outside, sympathizers and human rights advocates are angry and have been issuing one statement after the next. However, it seems that no solution is yet at hand, and everyone is still condemning and denouncing what is happening. No one has been able to even deliver humanitarian aid or stop the catastrophe.
فضلا عن إيقاف الكارثة. مرات ومرات تصدر منظمة التعاون الإسلامي الإدانات ضد ميانمار.
Time after time, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation issues letters of condemnation to Myanmar due to its treatment of the Muslim minority. But the Asian state that is a member of the ASEAN organizations pays no attention to the calls. Myanmar's president insists that he does not recognize the Muslims in his country, as if they do not exist, implying that those who want them can take them. There is no excuse for such expulsions and human rights denials. In a meeting held on Friday for the representatives of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Geneva, the Secretary General sent urgent letters to those responsible in Myanmar, including the President and the opposition. He also called on UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to put an end to this plight.
Well, life for women in Indian-administered Kashmir is extremely hard. Decades of conflict, domestic violence and mental diseases have all taken a toll on Kashmiri women. Data from many international organizations show women in the territory are the biggest victims of violence in the world. Munavar Zaman has more.
Kashmir was renowned to be the heaven on earth. A famous poet once said that if there is heaven anywhere on the earth, it's here. But more than 2 decades of unrest have claimed lives of many people in the valley. Women have been the ones who suffered the most. Some of them lost their sons, while others lost their husbands, fathers and brothers. During the decades of conflict and strife, women in Kashmir have paid a hard price.
Women here have faced all sorts of the human rights violations, rapes, near the line of actual control, which have gone unreported. Then the other thing is also the economical dimension they're facing, because there is no support system to them. With the result, they are facing enormous problem here.
The state government seems to have taken no study of the present status of women in Kashmir. But independent data collected by international and national women organizations suggest that Kashmiri women are the biggest victims of sexual violence in the world. Recently, several women organizations gathered at New Delhi to highlight the violation of Kashmiri women's rights and their plight. They said women in Kashmir are degraded and humiliated by security forces under the pretext of security checks.
See, you have to see the context of the militarization in Kashmir. You have 700,000 security forces, what they call, army. They're controlling their lives. They're controlling the people right here. And we have half of the populations of the women, right? So women are mostly ignorant of their right. I'm talking mostly about the rural women, you know, not the elite class from the urban area.
On the other hand, rape continues to be the instrument of oppression, with the state police refusing to register cases and bring the guilty to justice. Women victims in the valley are suffering from deep trauma that often results in suicide. Cases of post-traumatic stress disorder are on the rise, and the doctors are admitting an upsurge in mental diseases among women. However, an Indian official who did not want it to be named said, "Government understands the rights of Kashmiri women and is taking all necessary measures to ease their plight." Experts say the state and the central government have shown no sensitivity to the plight of these women, who have been left to fend for themselves and plunged into destitution. Munawar Zaman, Press TV, Indian-administered Kashmir.
A Palestinian was martyred and 2 others wounded by the gunfire of the Israeli occupation army at an entrance gate into occupied Jerusalem. Palestinian sources said the wounded were transported to Ramallah hospital. Meanwhile, the occupation's authority refused to hand over the martyr's body. A witness clarified that the military checkpoint at Jerusalem's eastern entrance opened fire at the car the victims were riding in. American Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney expressed his support for what he considered to be Israeli concerns over the Iranian nuclear program. During his visit to the occupied Palestinian territories, Romney assured his support for Tel Aviv, declaring Jerusalem as the capital of the Israeli entity.
يبدو أن سباق الرئاسة الأمريكي نقل قاعدته من بلده الأم.
It seems the American presidential race has moved its base from its home country to the Israeli occupation entity, turning it into a platform to win the support of American Jews and Israel's backers in the United States and gather the endorsement of the occupation entity's leaders. It started earlier this week with Obama, who put on a show in his Oval Office in the White House by signing the Enhanced Security Cooperation Act with the Zionist entity. During the ceremony, Obama was surrounded by representatives of the Zionist lobby, AIPAC, and a number of congressmen confirming Washington's solid support for the entity. As for his Republican opponent, Mitt Romney, who worries about lagging behind his Democratic rival, he personally went to occupied Palestine to portray himself as a better friend to the Zionist lobby than President Obama. Romney's visit had a busy schedule that included visits with the entity's leaders, speeches, a visit to the Wailing Wall among crowds of Israelis, and making promises and statements that appeal to Israelis.
Very concerned about
We are very concerned about the development of the Iranian nuclear issue. We feel that it is unacceptable for Iran to become a nuclear state because it poses a threat to Israel and the world.
ملف القدس كان هو الآخر حاضرا في ذاكرة رومني ليحاكي العقل.
Romney used Jerusalem to target the Israeli mindset and its historic ambitions in hopes of receiving more votes. So he announced that this holy city is the capital of the Israeli entity.
تصريح اعترضت عليه القيادات الفلسطينية.
The Palestinian leadership objected to the statement, but its weak objections remained mere lip service. And while chief negotiator Saeb Erekat denounced describing occupied Jerusalem in such a manner, as well as the American election campaign's auctions at the expense of the Palestinian people, Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority Salam Fayyad received the American presidential candidate. He held a meeting with Romney that was described as semi-secret, and its details were not revealed. No meeting was held with the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. Fayyad sought to underplay the importance of not arranging a meeting between Abbas and Romney, suggesting there was a simple scheduling conflict.
I had previously met with Mr. Romney twice, and when I meet with him, I do not meet with him on a personal basis. I meet with him as Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, as is headed by President Mahmoud Abbas.
وينهي رومني زيارته للأرض المحتلة بحفل لجمع.
Romney concluded his visit to the occupied territories with a fundraiser. Most of the attendees were American Jews living in the Israeli entity. He's hoping that his statements will have an impact that will allow him to win the American presidential seat.
على مقعد الرئاسة الأمريكي.
This hour, the Cabinet is meeting to approve yet another series of financial measures, including billions of shekels in tax hikes and budget cuts, in order to plug a growing deficit in the state budget. The measures are expected to pass, but not unanimously. Here with more is IBA's Ellie Walkerlander. Good evening, Ellie.
Good evening. Thank you, Yochanan. The impending economic measures were presented by Finance Minister Yuval Steinitz today in an attempt to cover the 12 billion shekel hole in the 2013 budget. The gap is expected because of a drop in tax revenues. Details of the economic package were finalized over the last few weeks by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Finance Minister Steinitz, and Bank of Israel Governor Stanley Fischer. Among the measures expected to be approved is a 1% increase in income tax for anyone who earns more than a gross monthly salary of 8,800 shekels. There will also be a 1% rise in VAT from 16 to 17%, which will take effect on Wednesday. Officials say the measures would raise the annual tax burden on Israeli households by an average of 1,740 shekels. At the same time as the tax hike, there are also budget cuts, beginning with an immediate across-the-board budget cut of 700 million shekels, which will see spending cut by 5% across all government ministries, with the exception of defense, education, social services, and immigrant absorption. Netanyahu defended the tax hikes and budget cuts at the start of the cabinet meeting, saying the moves are tough but necessary, as inaction would harm Israeli citizens. Noting the economic crisis in Europe in recent years, Netanyahu said the governments who didn't act in time, decisively and responsibly caused great damage to their citizens. I will not allow that to happen. I'm asking ministers to show responsibility and determination to protect the Israeli economy. And while the cabinet was meeting, some 150 social activists staged a protest rally outside the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem over the plan to raise taxes. They weren't alone in their protest. Labour Party Chairwoman Shelley Yachimovich said that the budget cuts prove once again that the Prime Minister made an error in his taxation policies, which mainly subject the middle class to the continuing tax hikes. The measures are expected to pass by a large majority, although members of the Shas party are expected to abstain or more likely vote against. What is not clear is what will be the political ramifications of today's vote.
In response to the public prosecutor's request, the Israeli Supreme Court decided to postpone the evacuation of the McCrone settlement outpost until August 21st. The settlement is established on the lands of a number of citizens from the town of Dur al-Qara, north of Ramallah. According to the court, the firman aims to look into the appeals of the settlers who claim they received the lands on which the settlement was built from their owners. Meanwhile, new data published by the Israeli Interior Ministry on the number of settlers in the West Bank and occupied Jerusalem reveals a sharp increase in their number, rising by nearly 4.5% in 1 year. The report also reveals that the number of settlers in the West Bank has surpassed 650,000, including 300,000 settlers in occupied Jerusalem. Knesset member representing the extremist National Unity Party, Yaakov Katz, said the plan is for the number of settlers in occupied Jerusalem to reach 400,000 before the upcoming scheduled elections. Volunteers at the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem were able to film a video of an occupation soldier attacking a young man in Hebron and breaking his nose. The soldiers had stopped a number of young men at the Beit Hadassah checkpoint in Hebron. and then beat up 17-year-old Tahir Ghanem. The soldier also headbutted the young man in the face and broke his nose. The B'Tselem organization said the boy was detained in an occupation army camp for several hours before he was released and transported to Hebron Hospital, where it was revealed that his nose was broken.
In Syria, battles continued to rage in the city of Aleppo as regime forces confirmed they regained control of the Salahuddin neighborhood. Paris is calling for an emergency meeting by the UN Security Council before the end of the week. The British Foreign Ministry said in a statement that the Syrian charge d'affaires Khalid Ayoubi has resigned from his post, saying he is no longer willing to represent Bashar al-Assad's regime due to the acts of violence it has committed.
On this third day in the battle for Aleppo, the regime's army said it was able to regain parts of the Salah al-Din neighborhood. Syrian state TV aired footage of the army patrolling some of the neighborhood's streets and alleys. However, the armed opposition denied the report, confirming that regime forces were not able to advance 1 meter. The Free Syrian Army announced it captured the Anadan neighborhood that is a key strategic point located 5 kilometers northwest of Aleppo. According to Syrian state TV, the army has purged the Al-Karabis neighborhood and homes and the areas of al-Sabaniya and al-Shufaniya in the countryside of Damascus of the armed groups. In other developments, the Syrian Observatory confirmed that unknown gunmen have assassinated pilot Faris al-Safi by opening fire at him as he was traveling on the road to Damascus International Airport. Faris is the son of pilot General Ibrahim al-Safi, who held senior positions in the Syrian leadership under the late President Hafez al-Assad. Meanwhile, the Syrian Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Walid al-Moallem met with Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who said that his country is a brotherly state to Syria and stands by it in the face of the conspiracy until the victory of right against wrong. Ahmadinejad also expressed confidence that Syria will prevail due to the wise leadership of President Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian people's support. Al-Moallem stressed that Syria is determined to foil the conspiracy facing the country and to fight the armed terrorist groups that are committing criminal acts with the support of certain Arab and Western countries, which are harboring and supplying them with weapons and money. Al-Moallem also met with the head of the Iranian Supreme National Security Council, Saeed Jalili, and the Speaker of the Iranian Shura Council, Ali Larijani, and briefed them on the current situation in Syria. Meanwhile, the head of the UN Observers Mission in Syria, General Babakar Gai, said his team is working toward the implementation of the UN Security Council resolution and the plan of the UN envoy, Kofi Annan.
The Syrian government committed to Annan's plan, and the crisis in Syria couldn't be resolved except by an agreement between the Syrian people and their leadership.
Politically, French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius, whose country is due to assume the UN Council's rotating presidency, expressed fear that a massacre may unfold in Aleppo and warned that the conflict may easily spread to neighboring countries.
We will make a request before the end of this week for a Security Council meeting, probably on the ministerial level, to try to stop the massacres and to prepare a political transition.
Meanwhile, the Turkish army sent new military reinforcements to the Kilis area along the Syrian border. In Iraq, the al-Sadr movement's liberal bloc said the latest dispute between the Peshmerga forces and the Iraqi army over the security deployment was expected, given the lack of reforms of the respective tasks of the federal government and the government of the Kurdistan region.
The bloc Secretary General Dia al-Assi told al-Markaz al-Khabari, an Iraqi media outlet, that all political parties are to blame for the unclear powers and responsibilities of Baghdad and Erbil, and warned of the implications of political disputes. It is a new chapter in the political scene as diverging stances are being adopted. They range between pacification and the call for reforms.
This comes following the latest position adopted by the presidency of the Iraqi Kurdistan province that led to the deployment of Iraqi military forces at the border with Syria. A number of parliamentarians have called for a questioning of the president of the province over his stance on the military deployment.
In light of the last position of the leadership of the Iraqi Kurdistan province to deploy Iraqi military military forces at the border with Syria to maintain the peace, many parliamentarians are demanding that the president of the province be questioned. This time, the Iraqi political scene has shifted between those who are calling for pacification and moving forward with reform, and those who want a unified position against this action that is considered unconstitutional. The Constitution granted the federal government the power to deploy Iraqi forces in any part of Iraq.
The government is supposed to act. It is being blamed and will be held responsible in case it fails to do so, because the security situation is under threat now. The government is supposed to take precautionary measures. We must decrease the number of these statements that many are issuing and always creating more problems, be it from the federal government or the provinces, or between Iraq and neighbouring countries. We must decrease the importance of these unnecessary statements.
Representatives of the Kurdistan Alliance defended the position of the president of the Kurdistan region. They said it was a reaction to the province and the federal government's coordination committee that was not informed of the deployment of Iraqi armed forces.
If forces are deployed to any disputed area, the coordination committee must be informed. There was a precedent and, at the time of the turmoil in the city of Jalala and al-Saadiyya, Peshmerga forces were used, but they did not enter the city. They remained at the border until they received the approval of the coordination committee, the Iraqi Defense Ministry, and the Peshmerga Ministry.
And with that, the call for reform presented by the National Alliance remains the last hope to solve the crisis.
We are waiting for the completion of the reform call by our brothers at the National Alliance, and to present it to other political blocs, and not only focus on the larger political blocs.
Reform and dialogue is the right path. This is why the National Alliance initiated the calls for reform. This option is not the end, but the beginning of the project.
The bickering between the two sides is dominating the Iraqi political scene, despite the calls for pacification and the belief by most political blocs that reform is the best path towards a solution. From Baghdad, Razak Al-Ghali, Al-Iraqiyya.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincote Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories. World news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.